Welcome. Today we are going to be talking about the most pervasive and pernicious illness that not only affects men, but women too. It's pornography addiction. Catholic Herald writes that more Americans than ever think pornography is morally acceptable. There are many reasons why people seek out pornography, and one of them being loneliness. Research conducted with colleagues at Brigham Young University suggests that there's a pairing between pornography use and loneliness, and that loneliness and pornography appear to mutually escalate together. Washington Examiner writes that a significant amount of teen screen time is also spent viewing pornography and engaging in other sexual activity on the internet. The first time I encountered this reality of pornography into our society is when I would have a young adult lady came to me, and in tears she was sharing her struggle, her deep struggle with pornography use. And she told me that it was really hard for her to open up. And so she was sharing with me, like, Carl, I just feel like I am worthless. I feel so ashamed of myself, but I just don't know how to overcome this. And as I was speaking with her, I realized that there are so many women like her that may not even be opening up about this, that may not even know that they are not the only ones who struggle with pornography addiction. And so I would like to share with you, any women who are out there who are struggling with this pornography addiction, to know that you're not alone, that this is a topic that doesn't just affect men, but it affects women that are so ashamed and so wounded, and that God can heal those wounds and you can overcome this illness.
Shalom World asked women what they think about porn addiction.
I really do not know about that at all. I don't know any women that do, but I do know men.
Too many.
I don't know anyone personally who does for women. This sounds bad, but I guess I always think of it as a man's thing, but I'm sure there are women, and I don't know anybody personally that does.
A lot more than most people think.
You know what? I don't have an answer for that. That's something that really hasn't touched my life personally.
I think there is more men that deal with the issue.
It's a good question. I don't know. I'm not sure.
Many times people think it's a problem for men, but I do know that it's on the rise with women.
I don't know, because I don't think that it's something that's really talked about, quite honestly.
I don't know, to be honest. I really don't. Persevere and believe that just as anything that may be challenging to someone else, that there's hope and there's a future beyond that one circumstance and one aspect of your life.
Any addiction can be overcome with the help of God. Trying to recognize that a woman, if she knows her own dignity, then maybe that would help to end the addiction.
Just reminding them that they're loved and that they don't need to subject themselves to that, and just reminding them of God's love for them.
There are a lot of support groups such as SA, 12-step program, very good for that kind of problem.
Just remind them that they're not the sum of their weaknesses, but they are infinitely loved. Just reminding them of that everyone has struggles, everyone has crosses to bear. We all struggle with different things, and just letting them know that they are human, and that is why Christ came for them.
Well, I think that God can heal all areas of your life. He's amazing, and if you just be honest and open up that area of your life to Him, I think He can bring new life out of that.
Definitely, I say that there's hope and healing in the church, and to seek help, because I think a lot of times we have these lost desires that we think we want something, but in reality, I think God can purify those, and we have to be willing to take each other's hands and encourage each other to a higher standard, and so that's something that's very important.
I guess I would just encourage them to run to Jesus. I just think that any addiction, that is always my answer, to run to Jesus, because He is the healer, He's the great physician, and He can help you heal those addictions.
Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts on this topic. So I went on a deep dive through social media to see what other women had to say about pornography addiction. At the D. Evans, I prayed at an altar call Wednesday for those struggling with lust, perversion, and pornography addiction. The response was overwhelming. At Erlenmeyer Green, a pornography addiction and overcoming that makes it so you can change someone else's life in the future by your experiences. At Don't Eat Trash, God smashes and frees and liberates us from deep hurt and addiction. Let Him. Say yes. Be free. At Favor Nwanda, a lot of emphasis has been placed on sex before marriage, and I feel like the same energy should be put into the struggle with porn and masturbation.
Wow, I'm so touched by all of these stories. They're very poignant and very human. It's so good that people are willing to share. But I was particularly struck by that altar call, that so many people openly came up to be healed from those things. That's a good thing.
And so we are so honored, so blessed to have Audrey Assad and Chloe to be talking and breaking open about how to overcome this addiction and to share with all of you what you can do to heal and to trust in God's unconditional love for you. So we have Audrey Assad, who is a popular Catholic singer and songwriter, known for albums such as The House You're Building, Heart, Fortunate Fall, Inheritance, and her most recent release, Evergreen. But what sets her apart from other Catholic musicians is her unique sound and courageous witness. Audrey has spoken openly about her past struggles with pornography and has even contributed her story to the book Delivered, the stories of men and women who turned from porn to purity.
And today we are so happy to also welcome Chloe Langer. She's the editor for Epic Pew and Catholic Singles, and she's the host of 2 podcasts, Letters to Women and the Catholic Podcast. She also has a blog called Old Fashioned Girl, where she writes about Catholicism and living out the feminine genius in her ordinary, everyday life. Welcome, both of you. Thank you, Audrey and Chloe, for being with us today.
Hi. Hello. Thank you.
We're going to just start with Chloe because something that I believe it was Matt Fradd said has really stayed with me, and that is if your children have smartphones, they've got porn in their pockets. So let's start, just for everybody's sake, so we're on the same page. Would you give us a definition of pornography?
Yeah, the definition of pornography is material that depicts erotic behavior intended to cause sexual arousal. And that definition of the intention of what pornography is, the intention to cause sexual arousal, is a really important point just to hammer home. If you paint the definition of pornography with a broad brush, it can also include things that are artistic, where their purpose is artistic. So when you have that definition of the intention to cause arousal, that really just narrows that definition in. We used to think of pornography as a stack of Playboys underneath someone's bed. Unfortunately, like you said, with Matt Fradd's quote about if your kids have pornography, or if your kids have a smartphone, they have pornography in their pockets. We've seen pornography just kind of leak into our lives, whether that's through social media, whether that's through YouTube. It only takes a couple of clicks out of just sheer curiosity's sake to end up on a pornographic channel, unfortunately. With the apps that we're using as adults, but also our kids, Snapchat recently took a story off of their app where Cosmo was running a After Hours, which was a late night, just a pornographic channel. So unfortunately, it's too easy to get access to, especially for adults and kids who are just curious. Like, no one wakes up in the morning and wants to get addicted to pornography. Unfortunately, it's really easy to run across, and yeah, unfortunately.
Wow, yeah, it's something that can really seep into somebody's mind before they realize it. I know that I viewed some as a young woman, and it really scarred my imagination. It's something that I've had to bring back to confession again and again, the way these kinds of images and impure thoughts can really take over sometimes.
Mm-hmm. Audrey, for all the people who have not yet heard your story or who have even listened to some of your inspiring music, how were you introduced to pornography in your life?
I was 15 when I first saw it, which I think is actually kind of late by today's standards, definitely, because I think the studies differ in their findings, but some studies show that the average age of exposure is 8 or 9 years old across genders. And I was 15 when I saw it. It was leaking through my television in one of the higher channels. And I was just scrolling through, I wasn't looking for it. It was something that I viewed by accident, and I was just insanely curious about what it was. And
yes.
I kept watching to try to figure it out. And so that was sort of how it came in, and how I began watching it compulsively was really just after that first exposure. I kept going back, as I had time and space to do that. And so it quickly took over for me. It was pretty fast.
Mm-hmm. You were, when you speak about pornography, you often share how you didn't know enough about your body. No one at your church talked about it, no one in your community, and not even your parents. How important is it to know more and to kind of break open that taboo of being able to say pornography and to be able to know your parts and everything in between?
Well, as I've kind of lived out, my life with the after effects of that experience, one thing that I feel really strongly about is that shame solves absolutely nothing. And so when you have body shame and sex shame, which can come from actually knowing and hearing nothing, or it can come from hearing things like your body is something to be punished. Your body is shameful. It's too sexual. You have breasts, like whatever it is that you hear it in your church community or your family environment that might cause body and sexual shame, it can only contribute to secrecy and addiction, because really pornography addiction is not in itself, in my experience, it was not in itself the problem. There was a lot intersecting there that made that so attractive. And a lot of it had to do with shame. And then pornography really came in and hammered that shame even further down. And then it just was this cycle, a shame cycle that I got locked in. And so to me, kids probably will see pornography. This is just reality. But one thing that I feel we can do to protect them from it becoming maybe a lifelong problem is to have an open conversation at appropriate times with our kids and with our friends about what sexuality is, what our bodies do, what they're made for, and to affirm that inherent goodness that exists in our sexuality, our sexual function, and our human bodies.
Audrey, what was the tipping point when you came to realize that this addiction was just too much to bear? And what were your first steps, and what was that first week like for you?
Well, I mean, it all along to me felt like too much, but I really just felt clueless. I didn't know what to do or how to stop or who to talk to. I mean, I definitely believed myself to be the one and only woman in the world who had this problem, because every time I was in a Sunday school class or what have you, or camp or retreat, they always mentioned pornography and as a masculine issue, specifically masculine and not feminine. So it was just hammered home to me, like, you're the only one, you have this huge problem, no one can help you. I had this whole inner dialogue going on, or monologue going on. And so at some point I just got tired of feeling like I was the only one who knew this secret about me. I sort of felt like even if everyone who I tell hates me, it would be better for them to know, because I feel like a fraud. I feel like I'm living a double life. And I sort of came to a place where that became too much for my emotional life, and I couldn't take it anymore. And so I sort of prayed, and I wasn't feeling like I was getting answers to prayers, but I asked God to sort of give me a few people that I could talk to, like, who's safe, who could I say this to? And I picked 3 girls in my life, and it was amazing because each and every one of them. So my first steps were to tell these 3 women that I had known, and every single one of them looked at me and said, "I have this problem too." And it was, so that first week of just having those conversations was insanely liberating, because I suddenly realized all these things I'd been telling myself about how isolated I truly was, and the fact that I believed that I was the only female struggling with this, were just shot to hell right away. And so the liberation began immediately, even though the problem didn't cease overnight. As you say, it's not an overnight healing process, but there is a very real healing that does begin when you finally understand that you are not alone. And that is, again, a lie that precedes pornography addiction. And so that began to heal. And as that began to heal, then healing sort of began to seep into the other places that needed it. So that was how it all began for me.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Audrey. Just want to, as you've mentioned already, a lot of people think there's nothing wrong with porn. And St. Teresa of Avila talks about, or sort of likens the soul to a garden. And I think we all know at a certain point in our spiritual lives that whatever you plant there does grow. And so we do have to weed it out. That's part of going to confession and all of that. But so what do we say to people, Chloe, who say there's nothing wrong with it, it's harmless?
Yeah, so first, pornography teaches us, just as visual watchers, that the point of a relationship is pleasure. And that can lead to a culture of use. So automatically, it's redirecting our hearts from this knowledge that love is to will the good of the other. John Paul II talks about this in Theology of the Body, but instead encourages us to think of each other as a means to an end, and that end is pleasure. So the first way it harms us is our relationships. The second way is that it harms our brains physically. There's a great resource out there called Fight the New Drug, and they really talk about the psychological and physical changes that pornography has when it comes to our brain. And so when you look at someone who is addicted to pornography as watching pornography on a regular basis, the brain patterns, the parts of their brain that light up when they're watching pornography, are similar to those of a person addicted to drugs. And so what this means is that when you are watching pornography, your brain is releasing just hits of dopamine, which is a pleasure, and rewiring, physically rewiring the way that your brain responds to pleasure. So not only is it harming the way that we see love and redefining in our mind what sex is, but it's also physically changing our brain. And that's a huge effect in our lives.
And so much other research supporting that shows that it leads to male not infertility, but inability to become aroused by other human beings. And also that, on a positive note though, for our viewers' sake, the brain rewires very easily with repetitive use. But as hard as it is to break a habit, the brain then rewires again when you fight against that habit. So you can rewire your own brain through a change of habits. There's always hope, but the brain is an amazing thing. Thank you so much, Chloe.
You know, Chloe, you were talking about all these different types of ways pornography harms our relationships. And one thing that I've seen from people who have come, directees, young adults, teens, is that it really harms themselves, the way that they view themselves, and their relationship with God. I keep thinking about this young woman, but then I've had several other young women who came to me and say, I just feel like, how could I be loved by God when I feel so dirty? I feel so worthless right now. Audrey, could you please address that? How can these women who struggle with this addiction and feel that worthlessness, feel this separation from God, how can they overcome that and learn to accept God's unconditional love for them?
Well, as I said before, I think something that has really helped me is to realize that if I continue to live from a place of shame and self-loathing, any improvements I display in my behaviors are actually being done out of something that will not sustain itself. And so it's very good to set goals about not watching pornography or whatever, but at the end of the day, unless your identity is healed in terms of believing that your primary origin, destination, and identity is loved by God, then you're not really experiencing the kind of life Jesus came to give, which is a life free from that self-loathing and shame. A lot of times I think Christians focus in on the future salvation as what we are given by the life and death of Christ. But in actuality, that's only one piece of it. To experience life in Christ is to be experiencing a new identity. And actually, it's not even really new. I mean, it was your identity. You just have to really walk into it, live out of it. And so to really start to accept that is to cease to put the focus on the things you're doing wrong, because I think that actually, again, contributes to the perpetuation of the problem. And to really begin to seek, how do I find my home in this reality that I am not worthless and have never been worthless, even when I have been watching pornography and masturbating compulsively. It has not changed who I am. How do I begin to live from that instead of focusing all the attention on stopping the bad things? When you really, really enter into and encounter and contemplate that worth and that dignity that you have bestowed upon you just by existing, because God made you and stamped his image upon you, then you will start to see change. I mean, I firmly believe that it's not about not doing bad things. It's about finding your identity and living from it.
I'd just like to reflect something back, which is that through his wounds we are healed, and through our own wounds others are healed. And we can present ourselves broken to God before we are fully healed of our addiction and say, Lord, as I am now, take me and make good come from my life, because you can do anything, and I am in your hands and in your heart. So good to know that he is just completely there for us. Chloe, back to you for maybe some insight or perspective on why this is becoming such a problem for women more and more. Why are women really getting hit with this?
Yeah, so we mentioned in the beginning just how accessible pornography has been. So I think that's really at the heart of it, how it's easy to get addicted to pornography. It doesn't take much to find pornography. But I think something too to really emphasize is something that Audrey put so beautifully, which was that pornography was the beginning of a problem, but the roots of the issue was a heart issue. It was something so much deeper. And so really looking at there's this great blog, Beggar's Daughter, that's run by Jessica Harris. She was 17 years old and she decided to not become a doctor, but to instead pursue a career in the pornography industry. And she has this blog where she talks to women about how they got addicted to pornography. And so many of their stories reflect back this message of, I didn't think I was lovable. I've been taught that I'm not beautiful because I don't measure up to these standards. I turn to pornography when I'm stressed at work. And different things. So, and two, to recognize that each woman's story of how she got addicted to pornography is just as unique as she is. If a woman opens up to you about her addiction to pornography, she's more than likely not opening up on a whim. This is something that she's been thinking about and praying about and has been fighting against shame to come to you. And so asking questions like, what were you thinking? Jessica Harris has this great quote where she says, I chose that sin, but I didn't know what I was choosing when it came to consequences. And so just to recognize that there's so much pain and so much hurt that comes from an addiction to pornography that isn't helped by how easy it is to access pornography.
What would be a good response to someone who says, I think I'm addicted to porn?
Just something to come alongside them and again, just affirm that they're not the sum of their weaknesses. So often it's easy to identify ourselves with our broken parts, to be like, well, I am an addict to pornography. But the reality, and like Audrey's pointed out so beautifully, our identity is God's beloved. So just to come alongside them. And I think honestly, the most important thing you can do is to listen, not to try to fix an addiction. When someone becomes addicted to pornography, it doesn't happen overnight, and it's not a healing process that happens overnight either. So just a patient listening to be able to be a place, especially as a woman, where another woman's heart can unfold. Edith Stein talks about how women's hearts are places for women's hearts to unfold or for others' hearts to unfold. And so just being a place where there can be an authentic encounter and there can be conversation that includes a lot of listening.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful, thank you.
Audrey, you are a story of hope. You know, when you first encountered pornography and you eventually overcame it. If you could share some practical tips to our women viewers who are struggling with pornography addiction, what can they do to heal from it? What can they do to overcome it? What can they do to stop this illness from taking over their life?
I know I keep saying this, but I really want viewers to take this home. It really is about instituting practices and habits that are coming from who you are. And it is not about stopping as much as it is about starting. I feel that that's very important because like diet culture, the mechanisms in our brain that start to treat even things like healthy eating as self-punishment, you want to stay away from that. We don't want to say, oh, I'm not watching pornography and I'm like self-flagellating,
Yes.
that really doesn't solve the issue. And so for me, the tips that I'm presenting are things that for me have been practically helpful with pornography, yes, but are just important for living life in a whole way. And so one thing you can do is to, access the confessional. And if you're a Catholic, that's something that you know about, that you can receive spiritual healing from. And hopefully you have a good confessor who is not shaming, who is not incognizant of the fact that this happens to women, because it can actually be a very damaging experience when you go to the confessional and the priest doesn't know how to handle that information from you as a woman. So that's something that if you've had a bad experience, try someone new. Even ask your friends, like, do you have a good confessor who's compassionate and who understands this? Being open and honest with friends that you trust and your family, if they're safe, if they're trustworthy, will help a lot, because it deflates the balloon of, feeling the pressure of isolation. And you will find that a lot of your female friends do watch pornography or have in the past, or are curious about it or what have you. That'll surprise you and help with the feeling of isolation and solitude that you experience. And then I would say seeking out a counselor is great for everyone. And it's even more helpful for people who are experiencing any kind of addiction or compulsive behaviors. And I have many, many compulsive behaviors. Pornography was only one. So therapy has been something that I go to over and over throughout my life in phases as I seek to deal with this tendency to be compulsive. And I have OCD, and it's all kind of a part of it for me. And so dealing with the holistic person, emotional health and wellness can really impact things like pornography, things like physical health. All of those things can live together and help each other to be better. The last thing I would say is that there are a couple of really great online resources that I believe in. One of them being the Porn Effect. And there's a battle plan on that website. And I think you'll share more about resources and the websites you can visit. There's a battle plan on there that's really practically helpful. Again, though, I want to stress, it is not about ceasing bad behaviors as much as it is about seeking to heal the whole person and see how pornography addiction enters into your general self, and then try to sort of approach the healing of your identity and your person as the main battle plan for overcoming something like this.
I'd just like to tag team onto the idea of getting some therapy too, because sometimes a therapist can ask you, well, what would your life be like if you were less isolated? What would your life be like if you got a little more exercise or spent more time maybe serving others and getting out of yourself and that place in your brain, especially for young people who doubt themselves in such a painful way. Youth ministers, as you well know, often report amongst themselves that a lot of young people feel like if people really knew them, they wouldn't like what they saw inside. And so there's already that feeling of secrecy with a lot of young people and that insecurity. So thank you for mentioning the porneffect.com, Audrey. Thank you, both of you, for this beautiful and very powerful sharing. This is tearing the veil away from something that really needs to be fully exposed, talked about, opened up about, so women can come forth and heal, be natural with each other, and lift each other up. Also, the John Paul II Center.org, and that's John Paul, number 2, center.org, has a page with a listing of many resources, both Catholic and Protestant, for healing from porn addiction. And so finally, just again, want to thank you from the deepest part of our hearts, both of you, Audrey, for your very bold and faithful witness to the healing of your own soul and your own life, and Chloe for that wonderful bringing together of facts for us so that we are knowledgeable and we can go forth in knowledge and not ignorance. So thank you to our viewers. We are praying for you. Please pray for us too. God bless you.
If you have good news, we expect you to want to share it. Salvation in Jesus Christ, the Son of God, who for love of us and for our salvation came down from heaven. Salvation in His name, and He is the only Savior, is what we are on earth for. Therefore, all those who spread the good news of salvation in Jesus Christ, we should encourage them. I can speak, but how many people can I reach alone? But the media, the television people, the radio, the newspapers, and all those who use the computer and its derivatives in various ways to spread the gospel, we must thank them, we must encourage them, we must work with them so that they can continue to spread the good news. There's so much news that is not so wonderful in the world, but there is also news that is wonderful on the gospel of Jesus Christ. We encourage them and beg God to bless them, especially the Shalom World TV. God bless you.
Shalom World, God's own channel.